architecture begins with the Bagan Empire, who took power in the 800s but didn't blossom until they took over the Mon Empire to their south and imported their artisans. This led to the growth of Buddhism and the city of Bagan, from which nearly all traditional Myanmar architecture has evolved. In about 1500 BC, the people of Myanmar had become some of the very first humans on the planet to begin making bronze, farming rice, and domesticating animals. And by 2500 years ago, the region had become an important link in the trade route between the Middle East, India, and China. Myanmar's geography is one of the greatest causes of its current culture and past isolation, as the land is fairly inaccessible. Most conspicuous and impressive evidence of Myanmar's artistic culture is undoubtedly to be found in the country's ancient architecture. As is the case in much of Southeast Asia, almost all traditional Burmese art was devotional in nature and produced for display in or around temples and pagodas. Massive exception to these are the Buddhist temples and pagodas that can be found in every corner of Myanmar. The sheer number of them, leading Myanmar to be called the land of a million pagodas. Yangon, as the former capital of British-ruled Burma, has a fascinating array of buildings from the colonial era which are very much part of the city's identity. Mandalay, the last royal capital of Burma. Mandalay was established by King Mindon in 1857. The architectural style adopted by Mindon was in direct continuation with the Avana Amarapura tradition, richly ornamented in stucco and marble. Temples also benefited from wealth of elaborate and highly skilled wood carving, much of which has survived. Pyu City. The Pyu were the first documented inhabitants of modern-day Myanmar and are the first recorded living in the Irrawaddy Valley in the 2nd century BC. These Tibeto-Burman-speaking people established 12 walled cities that we know of, including 5 major city-states and numerous smaller towns and cities across central Myanmar. The 5 largest cities were called Bek Thano, Maingmau, Binaka, Hali, and Sri Setra. The Pyu people had a rich culture heavily influenced by their position on the trade route between India and China. Pagan Kingdom began when the great king Anawrahta took the throne in 1044. Anawrahta immediately set about building the pagan empire, which involved a series of broad-reaching socio-economic and religious reforms, uniting the regions that would later form modern-day Myanmar for the first time in the country's history. These reforms included the introduction of Theravada Buddhism to Upper Myanmar, an extremely important development in the country's history. Colonial architecture. Besides Myanmar's ancient religious buildings, the country also has a few excellent examples of colonial architecture dating back to days of British rule. There are some interesting examples to be found in Yangon, Pien Ulwin, Salai, Maulamien, and Mik. Wooden architecture. Traditionally, most buildings in Myanmar were built from wood, and most Burmese still live in wooden houses today, especially in rural areas. The most famous and photographed wooden structures in New Bing Bridge, a 1.2-kilometer thick wood bridge that was built in 1850 and believed to be the oldest and longest such structure in the world. Burmese architecture. There are essentially 3 kinds of Buddhist structures. Number 1, stupas, bell-shaped structures that contain a holy relic or scripture. Number 2, temples, place of worship somewhat similar to a church. Number 3, monasteries, which contain living quarters and meditation cells for monks. Prominent structures are stupas, temples, and monasteries. Stupas are solid structures that typically cannot be entered and were constructed to contain sacred Buddhist relics that are hidden from view in containers buried at their core or in the wall. Temples. This is a place where sacred shrines and images worship and contain numerous Buddha statues and images. Have an open interior that may be entered and in which are displayed one or more cult images as a focus for worship. Although the simple distinction between stupa and temple is useful, the distinction is not always clear. There are stupas such as the Myasedei that have the external form of a stupa but are like a temple with an inner corridor and multiple shrines. A building type of which there are abundant examples is the monastery, that can be either a one-room building or vast complex of buildings. Another example is royal palaces, which predate the colonial era, were often made of teak, an abundant tropical hardwood recently constructed places done with sometimes patch attention to detail and quality can be found at Mandalay and Shwedo. Design. The lotus motif is a decorative feature found on the architecture of Buddhist shrines and sacred depositories such as chedis or stupas. The upper part of a chedi just below the pinnacle consists of a diamond bud, the pennant-shaped vein. The umbrella, or T, is an elongated bulbous portion of the chedi known as a banana bud. Just below it is the kyayint or momif, that is a motif of a large lotus petals encircling the chedi. Next is the kyayan or moon vev, which is a part of the chedi that resembles a spreading upturned lotus flower. Then comes the kyanu, which is a motif of small lotus petals. And lastly is the kyamok or mumarsmurf, which resembles an inverted lotus flower. These motifs add to the grace and beauty of chedis. The lotus motif also decorates the pinnacles of tiered roofs of monasteries and the palaces, and there is also a vessel somewhat like a fruit stand decorated with lotus petals for offering food and fruits at sacred Buddha shrines. The exotic lotus is a motif which also adorns the gold thrones on which we place Buddha images. Pagodas and stupas. Burma is famous for its large and graceful pagodas. A pagoda in Southeast Asia is cone-shaped monumental structure built in memory of Buddha. But in the Far East, a pagoda is a tower-like multi-storied structure of a stone, brick or wood, usually associated with the Buddhist temple complex. The pagoda derives from the stupa of ancient India, which was a dome-shaped commemorative monument usually erected over the remains or relics of a holy man or king. Burmese traditional homes. According to countries and their cultures, the traditional house is made largely of bamboo. Flattened pieces of bamboo made into large, plated sections are used to make the walls. The floors are made of bamboo planks or wood. The frame of the house is made of wood, with hard and durable wood being used for the house posts. Roof coverings are made of a variety of materials including thatch, made from broad-leaved grass or palm fronds. Roofs may be covered with tiles, wooden shingles, or zinc sheets. Some old houses use whole tree trunks for pillars and have splendid thick paneling. The front of the house usually has a veranda that is raised a few feet off the ground. This is the public area where guests entertain. The center of the house is the living area for the family.
And this is the end of the session. Thank you for watching until the end. In the next session, we would talk about more example of prominent structure in Myanmar architecture.